This video tutorial will explain the perform test functionality in all three modules of the dataform, namely vegetation, soils, and hydrology. So I'll scroll down in my dataform window to the vegetation module. As you can see, I have a perform test button here. Now what this button does is essentially it takes your raw data and processes it and lets you know whether hydrophytic vegetation has been met or not. So what I will do is I'll click on perform test. I get an informational message here, click OK. So now as you can see, my tree stratum plant here is filled in as a dominant species based on the 50-20 rule. The dominance test worksheet is also filled in, and I can scroll down and see that dominance test is greater than 50% is one of the indicators. We're at 100% here, and thus we have passed hydrophytic vegetation, which we can see with this green diamond. Now, if you did want the prevalence index to fill out, even though dominance is already passed, you can simply click on Perform Test next to Prevalence. And again, you see that prevalence is also passed with the data filled in here. So now the same goes for morphological adaptations as well as problematic hydrophytic vegetation. You simply click on the Perform Test button next to these indicators, and you will be walked through the steps to see whether these conditions are met. One thing to note with perform test in all modules is that the calculations are consistent with the data you've entered at the time of performing a test. So if you edit your data, you will have to press perform test again to update your results accordingly. Now what this means is that if I add another plant here and give it an absolute cover of 10%, you can see that my results don't update just by adding a plant. What I'll have to do is click on Perform Test, in which case my results will update with my newly added plant here. So now let's go to the Soils module. Now in the Soils module, we also have a Perform Test button, and what it will do is very similar to vegetation. It will take your raw data, which you have entered here, and then see, based on an algorithm, whether it meets the conditions of any of these soils. Of course, it is always up to the user to make the end choice of whether one of these indicators is met. However, pressing Perform Test in the Soils module will give you some likely and most likely soils based on your soil profile. So I'll quickly enter in some data here, and then click on Perform Test. So now as you can see, you have a new window that is opened, and under Most Likely Soil, it says Soil Profile does not meet any of our most likely soil criteria. However, we do have two likely soils here. So now what you can do is choose any of these soils by clicking the box and then selecting OK. And if you don't necessarily agree with these recommended hydric soil indicators, you can always click on Pick Your Own Soil. But in this case, I do agree with the A2, so I'll click on OK. So now as you can see, the Soils module is refreshed. If I scroll down, I see that A2 is now selected. And I can also see that the soil criteria is met because of this red diamond here. So now I'll move to the hydrology module. The perform test button in the hydrology module is slightly different in that it actually only performs the fact neutral test when you click it. This is the case because the criteria to meet wetland hydrology is very simple. If you have one primary indicator or two secondary indicators, it meets the condition. So if you have, let's say, one of these selected, let's say surface soil cracks, I'll click that. And now what I will do, as you can see, is that the fact neutral test here, secondary indicator, is grayed out. I can't click on it. So what I will do is I'll click on Perform Fact Neutral Test. I get a couple of options on how to perform the test based on absolute cover or the number of species. So I'll use number of species, which is the default, and click on OK. So now if I scroll down, I will see that I get my fact neutral test remarks, which is here, and it has indeed passed. Now if I scroll up, I see that fact neutral test has been selected. So now if I simply save in this module, I can see that the blue diamond here has now been colored in as I have met the criteria for wetland hydrology. So now if I scroll up, as a last thing to note, I can see that by clicking Perform Test in all three modules, I got a green, a red, and a blue diamond. With all three wetland indicators satisfied, I get this yellow diamond to fill in, which indicates that indeed this data point indicates a wetland. And that wraps up how to use the perform test functionality in each module of the wetland determination data forms in CoreJD.